All right, this presentation is a small PowerPoint with a lot of information packed into it on the wine grape annual cycle. So we've talked about a lot of things so far, and we've bounced around a little bit from growing wine grapes to dealing with diseases or dealing with pests, fertilizing, all kinds of different things. So we're going to look at this to try to step back a moment and put some stuff into perspective in terms of the growth cycle. And hopefully this takes some of the things that we've learned and just wraps it into a neat package and ties a bow on it in your mind so you kind of get the growth cycle. So what happens in the spring? First thing that's going to happen in the spring, bleeding from the cut ends, from your pruning sites. And that's the first sign that you're going to get that it's happening. The season has begun. You've got some phloem tissue or phloem liquid that starts bleeding from the cuts, and that tells you the roots have activated and they're starting to turn all of that wonderful stored starch energy in the roots back into soluble sugar and then transport that sugar up through the vine out to the cordons and the buds to get ready to have that energy there for bud break. Shortly after that bleeding occurs, you're going to start seeing some swelling of the buds, the active buds that you left after pruning. And then you get bud break. So when the buds swell, you'll first see the scales starting to separate and these nice smooth buds where you can hardly see the scales except with a very good eyes or a hand lens. Now it's really obvious. The buds kind of look opened up, the scale tips are poking out, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get the green tip is pushing out, the cotton's pushing out, and you have bud break. The shoots have begun. And that's when you start your preventive fungicide program. Generally, in an IPM program, you only want to spray when there's a need to spray. Well, with fungicide in grapes, you know it's coming, it is a problem, and so you prevent it before it gets you. So if you're a conventional grower, you've got certain choices. If you're an organic grower, you're probably starting with sulfur at this time. The shoots grow slowly at first, certainly depending on their energy reserves. You want it to be relatively fast. You want to have good energy reserves. You want it to come out fast, but it's still slow relative to, you know, the number of millimeters of growth per day that you're getting early on versus what you're going to get very soon. It's going to speed up. Shoot growth hastens or speeds up when there are some mature photosynthetically active leaves. There's only so much energy from the roots coming up as glucose from last year, and so you need photosynthesis to start. Once you start getting some expanded leaves and photosynthesis starts, it's like the gates have opened and the shoots start really shooting. The clusters become visible. You can start making a first crop estimate, and as necessary, you can do shoot thinning if you need to, depending on the variety, depending on your harvest goals, depending on what you did with pruning the previous year, you might do shoot thinning at this time. And you might also get some lateral growth in this period. So in this early spring period, lots and lots of stuff going on, but it's primarily just making shoots and leaves. Anyway, and then from later in the spring to the early summer period, you get that first flush of root growth. At about 12 inches of shoot growth, you start getting about 30,000 new roots per vine, and you're going to start applying your NPK, your first fertilizer here generally. You're going to have your first wire move, and you might start foliar nutrients if you're growing conventionally. Again, it depends on your strategy, but this is from the point of view of a conventional grower here in the Central Valley. In the Salinas Valley, I'm sorry. Then you get bloom. Bloom begins and lasts about a week or two, depending on the weather and your variety. Boron and a second application of botrytis material is often added at this point. You need to make sure the boron is available for that flower set, or fruit set rather, and fruit development, seed development. You take petiole, blade, and soil samples and start checking them for all of the important nutrients and pH and everything else. So you take samples of the petiole, of the leaf blade, and the soil, and make sure you do all of the necessary laboratory tests at this time. Then you get shattering, and you know what shattering is, right? You better. And at this point, you might do some berry thinning if necessary. You might apply some gibberellic acid if you are producing table grapes. But for wine grapes, that's not something you do. Then berry set or fruit set, you get your second crop estimate. So now you've already seen your first crop estimate based on that early spring estimate, and you maybe did some shoot thinning, and now you get your second crop estimate. Shoot growth begins to slow down around this berry set period, and you have roughly half of the final leaf area of your canopy. It's about half the leaf areas there at this point. The trunk has its maximum growth rate at the bloom period. Lignification of the canes starts to occur. So the canes that are green and flexible and growing very rapidly, they just begin to start lignifying, where they harden and turn brown and turn from shoots to canes. Bud differentiation starts to occur. So these are the buds that you might be for next year, or the ones you might prune off, but the ones that you leave behind for next year when you prune, they're already starting to differentiate into their leaf primordia and bud primordia, leaf primordia and inflorescence primordia. I'm sorry, drew a blank there, but the buds are differentiating. They're forming what they're going to be next year at this stage of growth this year. Then we get lag phase, where the berry growth halts momentarily, or at least slows way, way, way down. And the berries are about half size at this lag phase. And it's kind of your last shot at crop thinning if necessary. Then we reach summer. The shoot and lateral growth slows down unless it's stimulated by excess water and nitrogen and a limited crop. So if you need to do any leaf removal, this is when to do it. Veraison occurs in midsummer. The berries start to soften as they ripen. Color, if they're red berries, starts to accumulate the color. The sugars accumulate and the acids decrease. And that's when, at least for this situation with wine grapes, you're ending your fungicide program. Lignification, the canes bark finish turning from green to brown, and so now you truly have canes and not shoots. And the trunk growth slows down during this summer growth period. Late in summer, you get the second phase of berry ripening. The berries may pass their maximum weight before harvest for some grapes, so they might reach a maximum weight and then actually start to lose weight as they pass that maximum weight. But not all varieties do that. Some grapes, they keep growing all the way till harvest, and you don't push it past that point. But Syrah, you actually do. You get a second root flush around harvest. We talked about this with vine nutrition and how you might handle that. Trunks grow post-harvest strongly if no other sink for carbohydrates. So if you don't have a second crop, which some varieties of grapes do, they get that second crop, you'll get that burst of post-harvest trunk growth. And that will be your last application of NPK potentially. And again, there's different strategies for fertilization, but that's certainly one strategy that is common for this vineyard manager. The buds enter their endodormancy period, stimulated to grow by more cold than warmth. So they're endodormant, so they're internally controlled. How do they turn off that dormancy? They need to experience winter. They need to get cold. And after they've been cold for a while, dormancy is broken, but they're not going to start growing again until it gets warm again in the spring. And they get nutrients moved up from the roots to feed them. In the autumn and early winter, carbohydrate storage, long periods of active photosynthesis post-harvest going to the roots and trunks. So all of that energy that didn't go into fruits, now where's it going to go? It's being pumped down into the roots. And finally, the leaves fall normally with the first frost or water and or nutrient stress. So there's a number of different possible triggers, and you start pruning at this stage. After leaf fall, you can start pruning, and there's different reasons and strategies. I know I've talked about some of it, but there are reasons why you might want to do early pruning. Earlier pruning is going to get you earlier bud break, but it also leaves cut ends exposed longer for potential disease issues. And so for certain varieties, certain disease conditions, you might want to push the pruning out later, closer towards the bud break period, or late winter type of a pruning. You're not going to push it to bud break, but you still might be in the late winter as opposed to mid to late fall, early winter. Buds then, and we do the pruning. What did I say? Buds enter ectodormancy. Oh, got it. That's it. That is the annual cycle, and there shouldn't be anything new there. It just kind of brought it all together and put it into a simple, here is the annual cycle in a short, simple slideshow.